how much of an influence does the Indian state, so the Indian government, have on media depictions of the Khalistan movement? Again, how much influence does the Indian state have on media depictions of the Khalistan movement? And if we could relate this to how Khalistan is often portrayed in Western media. And we'll start with Dr Jasjit Singh, who's obviously done a recent research project, as mentioned earlier. So in your opinion, when you were doing your research, how much influence does the state have on how perhaps other media or Western media have on the perception of Khalistan?
I mean, it was media depictions in Indian media which actually started my project off, which got me to produce my report. Especially around the alleged dossier that was going to be presented to Narendra Modi when he visited in 2015. A whole host of allegations in Indian media. There were TV programs produced as well.
Could we also expand on that point about the dossier?
The dossier, which then in Parliament was denied on 2 occasions in British Parliament.
Just to explain, so in 2015 November, the Daily Mail ran an article which stated that a dossier was being handed over by Narendra Modi to David Cameron about so-called terror camps of Khalistanis being run in the UK. The Sikh Council UK, through their research, received clarification directly from Parliament that no such dossier existed. The Sikh Press Association complained about the article in the Daily Mail. The Independent Press Standards Organisation actually rejected that complaint. That was because the article was just a copy of an article which is directly from India. So therefore, in their perception, the complaint would have to be taken up with the article in India. Sorry if you want to...
No, it's fine, because, I mean, the allegations included, members of Khalistan organisations are planning to hold radicalisation training classes. They named particular gurdwaras in Smethwick and Glasgow. So yeah, it was a whole host of allegations, and that was the point, as to what was the truth in these. And the point also is that you can still find these videos online now, so it's not as if these allegations have actually gone away. So doing the report, I tried to look at how representations of Sikhs had changed over the years, and which particular contexts had led to the terms extremism, fundamentalism, radical to emerge. There has been some work done on Indian media, particularly by Professor Gurnam Singh at Oxford Brookes, who actually looked at the role of All India Radio and Doordarshan in the immediate aftermath of the events of 1984. And he's done really well in a book called Embedded Journalism, Punjab, by Jasmine Singh Sidhu. You can Google that, it is online. He's basically looked at the role of the media, and he explains how in an illiterate society, the TV and radio play a very important role, obviously, because that's how people get hold of their news. And the kinds of rhetoric that were being produced by the state media could actually were disproven in a number of cases. And as Vijay said, the way the media is working at the moment, particularly in the online environment, if the story comes out in a particular media headline appears on Google, it's not as if journalists can make a distinction between headlines from particular countries. They all have the same sort of level, if that makes sense. So it appears that, given the online environment now, headlines from Indian media are actually probably being used more, and with syndication in the Daily Mail, for instance, would have more of an impact on countries outside India. So you see state organisations using terms like Sikh radicalisation, Sikh extremism, primarily I'd argue as a consequence of these terms being normalised in media headlines.
So that would be a strong influence then,
we
presume.
So, in one word, strong influence.
So Amardeep, please do let me know if you feel there's too many questions being fired at you, but as the journalist on the table, we'll go to you next. If you were, say, tomorrow to receive a press release from either an Indian journalist or another media organisation which ran a story about Khalistan, and you got the go-ahead from your editor to go ahead and run with that story, is that something that you feel you would be justified to do, or would you feel that there would be a need to do more research into the piece and clarify with the Sikh organisations or Sikh community?
Yeah, I mean, that's a given. As a journalist, you don't just copy and paste what somebody else has written. You take that as a starting point, and if there's something in there that's got a UK thread, you've got to remember, you've got to distinguish when we're talking about the Indian
press. I know you can't speak on the behalf of the Independent Press Standards Organisation, but just your opinion, why do you think they would reject a complaint about them doing exactly, about a Western media organisation, the Daily Mail, doing exactly what you just said, literally copying and pasting an article and putting it on a English site?
I said I wouldn't necessarily say that Daily Mail has the best journalistic capacity. It is the most complained about newspaper in the world ever.
But the Independent Press Standards organisation, who's meant to be policing these media outlets, why do you think they perhaps would reject any complaints about such an article? Just in your opinion, of course, because you can't speak on their behalf.
I'd need to know more details about the case, but I can't believe that would be the case. That is not a defence to say, well, we cut and pasted it, go and find the original. You've got to take responsibility. It was in your paper, so I don't think that's true. I don't think.
Well, we'd be happy to clarify.
I'd like to know more details about it. But as far as the actual question about the Indian state and how much influence do they have? They have some influence. I mean, every state has some influence on its press, even this country. And the general influence is one of nationalism and patriotism. So you'll find all the papers across the spectrum, whether they're right-wing, left-wing, when it comes to the integrity of the UK and its borders, they will all sing from the same hymn sheet. So you should expect that from every other sovereign government. No Indian state or Indian media is going to talk up the fragmentation and breakup of India. It's kind of almost common sense, I'd say. That they will certainly, or they certainly should, and this is where you can pick fault with them. They should have a balanced and accurate description of all sides. They are lacking in that, definitely. But and some of it does turn into pure jingoism. These proper shouting out. There might as well be an arm of the Hindu wing. But the bottom line is the Indian state still, I mean, I did a bit of research on this myself. I found that quite a few of the newspapers and big media houses, which not just own newspapers, they also have websites and blogs and whatever, either have very close links with the Congress Party, as in ex-MPs own some of these media houses. And then on the extreme other side, you've got the Communist Party having a major share in New Delhi TV. And they are completely against the BJP and the fight. So they're not all singing from the same hymn sheets. I mean, there is, on paper, India is supposed to be the biggest democracy in the world, and on paper, they do tick some of the boxes for that. They have an open and free press, as much as as much as we know it's free. I mean, it's not free in any country.
Can I just come in there? I think that there's some good points there. The Indian media isn't a monolith.
Yeah.
Ironically, actually, one of the most staunchly independent Indian newspapers, and I think it's one of the oldest, is the Hindu.
Yeah.
I say ironically because, in a sense, you might think that that's a kind of Hindutva, but actually regularly puts out stories against Modi.
It's got very socialist.
It's a very socialist, and that's partly because it's based in Chennai, in South India, and you do find that the press that comes out of the kind of central Hindi belt has a totally different outlook to the kind of press that comes out from West Bengal. So I don't think we should see the Indian media as a monolith. I think the other thing is, again, I don't think the conspiracy theories are that you've got, I mean, India can't organise much. You've seen how they organised the Asian Games. It was a disaster. So I won't give them the kind of credibility that they can conspire. I think that it's patronage. I think that what you get is, it's a configuration of business, gangsters, MPs, and we have that nexus.
Sounds like a conspiracy.
That does.
Well, I don't think it's a conspiracy because it happens across the world, but there is a nexus there. And of course, for them to have access to media is the way to, kind of put their own kind of people in a positive light. So I think it's more to do with that than any political conspiracy.
Just one final point. It's one of the things that, one of the strategies of the Khalistan movement should be to negate the Indian press by, one example, if the Indian press follow up, a hell of a lot of the stories that go into the Indian press are follow-ups from international press. They don't develop their own stories, they don't go out and find their own stories, they just hoover up what's going on around the world and put it in their newspaper. Now, if there was to be a pro or a sympathetic Khalistani article that went in the Western press, they will just reprint it in its entirety in the Indian press. And so, maybe the Khalistan movement should concentrate more, like I said, on courting the international press, so that the Indian press are forced to follow suit.
There is a good example. If you look at the Sikh Federation UK, they've been courting the Hindustan Times, so they regularly get their articles and their press releases printed verbatim in the Hindustan Times. So, I think there are these kind of possibilities. Yeah.
I think specifically on media depictions of the Khalistan movement, not general kind of depictions of Sikh or articles related to the Sikh community or the diaspora. I'll give you guys an example from the Times of India in June 1984. Terrorists made a desperate attempt to blow up the Akaal Takht, killed a number of men, women and children, and unsuccessfully tried to escape with huge amounts of cash, jewellery and other valuables. After their leaders were killed in the action on June 5th, the Akaal Takht was not damaged in the army action. And that's the Indian newspaper. The Indian government's official white paper on the June 1984 invasion of the Barside says that no women and children were harmed, and that's still the official position. So if we look at actually what's printed in the Indian media specifically about Khalistan, Khalistan is synonymous with terrorism, it's synonymous with militancy, it's synonymous with a backward, radical, a religious extremist type of Sikh. That's manufactured within the Indian media. I think the newspapers and the influence of the state, I think it's very naive to not think that the Indian government, as Amardeep clearly said, every government has an agenda to make sure that their line is carried in the media. And we know India is one of the worst countries in the world for journalistic freedoms, according to press trusts. There is copy and paste journalism that exists, and that's rampant. There's no further depth into any of the journalism. I'll give you a quote from The Guardian on 8th of June that says, New Delhi has kept alive a crisis in Punjab to achieve 3 questionable objectives. This is The Guardian in June 1984. To oust the Akali-led coalition government, to prevent a legitimate settlement of Punjab's territorial and river water disputes with the centre, and to forge a psychological wedge between the Hindus and the Sikhs. And this is The Guardian in June 8th, when you could argue that perhaps the standard of journalism, especially on reporting on something that was happening at that time, was a lot higher. Now The Guardian, like every other newspaper, literally copy and paste that same line. The Blue Star happened to flush out terrorists from the Barside. So the standard across the board has dwindled, and it's because of Orientalization. And again, it's about colonialism and coloniality and modernity. It's about looking at us as the other, that we don't have a legitimate opinion our voice has to be translated, and it has to be presented in the world stage for it to be considered legitimate and credible. Santaji has to be translated into English, Sikhi has to be translated into English. The media comments and does analysis from the outside, from the periphery, and the voices inside the community are depicted as subjective because religion is this private thing. Till this day, the British media doesn't know how to speak about something else, and he's described as a religious leader or something. They don't know how to describe him as a statesman or as a political activist, right? There's no consideration. He's only relegated to the sphere of religion and religious radicalism, and it's because the Sikh community violates the religious secular binary that's existed. But like Dr Gurnam Singh said, these are going to get into philosophical, theoretical arguments,
which we'll try and stay away from.
Like simple arguments.
I think
perhaps including
an important point to make though is that a lot of these narratives continue to exist, and once they're once they're out there. So, for instance, the idea that there was a brothel in the Barsal, for instance, that was reported in Indian media and then disproven. But the point is that the narrative exists no matter what, even though it was disproven later on. That happens today as well. When news gets out, it's out there, even if it's later retracted. You see the same thing with the Sun and whatever. Even though it's been retracted, the idea still gets out there. And some of these narratives still exist
as well. Why is it that especially during June, especially during that time, why the Indian media was questioning the character of these Sikhs, right? Like these religious radicals, and the media actually wanted to undermine their character from a Sikh point of view. So it shows that there was a clear agenda there, not just about undermining and not presenting any political narratives, but saying that these guys weren't even Sikh, that Shamsher Singh wasn't even a Sikh, that they were actually rapists and they had brothels inside the Akaal Takht. And a lot of people actually still believe this till this day, that Shamsher Singh was some kind of rapist and he wasn't a sant and he was a really bad individual. And that's Sikhs, not like the wider world.
I just want to ask Jasmine Kaur here a question. So you were on the BBC Asian Network the other day, and you stated that you, growing up, you were taught that Khalistan, in your own words, was a dirty word, and now as you've gotten older, you've found yourself affiliating with the Khalistan movement and openly declaring yourself as a Khalistani. Do you feel that was because here in the West we have more access to kind of unbiased media, even if it's just social media, from Sikh organizations, whereas in somewhere like India, the media depictions will be a lot more biased and perhaps even curtail kind of social media presence of Sikh organizations?
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. When I was growing up, the only discussions regarding Khalistan I had were with my family or with any books that I could get hold of or anything like that. And the media information that I had access to was the information that was literally being given out by, influenced by the Indian media and stuff like that. And I grew up, from the age of 11 or 12, whenever I heard about Santaji and stuff like that, I immediately used to think, I used to put him on the same pedestal as like Bin Laden and stuff like that, when it's nothing like that at all. And as I developed my own opinions, did my own research, whether it be academically, through political discourse, through my activism, through poetry, anything like that, any personal, political or professional field, I developed my own opinions on Khalistan, and I came to my own standing in my own viewpoint. And a major part of that was discussing it through social media, through like Twitter and Instagram. Facebook not so much, that's kind of irrelevant to my generation and whatever, it's more Twitter. You're able to engage with people from across the world and hold interesting and intellectual dialogue regarding the Khalistan movement and anything about it. Whereas maybe a girl my age or younger in Punjab, well, not just girls, but the youth in Punjab, they don't have access to this type of thing because they're literally spoon-fed what the Indian state wants them to hear. They're brainwashed, and to some extent, well, not to some extent, to a major extent, it's far hard for them to discuss because they're on the ground in Punjab. Like in Punjab, it's like, there's statistics, I can't give it to you off the top of my head, but there's statistics right there that from people suffering from PTSD, from things that have happened in the 80s, like people are still scared to talk about it. So of course they don't want their children to hear about it. They don't want their children to get involved in things like this. So I think in the West, and in the diaspora in particular, we are lucky and we are blessed that we have groups and places like this to discuss it, and organisations such as NSYF, Akaal Publishers, Basics of Sikh PA and stuff like that. So yeah.
I mean, just to kind of further on that question then, from what you read in Indian state media, do you feel that kind of you do not fit the stereotypical view of a Khalistan supporter, being a young woman that, by all means and accounts kind of fits in very nicely here in the West?
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. When it comes to the Indian media and the image of a Khalistani that the Indian government portrays, it's I'd say it's of an Amritdhari Sikh man, probably a Dr Singh, and when you think of someone who openly declares themselves of a Khalistani, like you wouldn't think of a young academic or a young poet like myself sitting in the Sikh diaspora who's cut her hair, who wears makeup and stuff like that. Like you wouldn't, I would say that I myself do not fit the stereotypical image of a Khalistani at all.
We're going to move on to our third question, unless we have any questions from the audience. Again, at any point, do raise your hand. Vijay, just 1 second before we let your question get answered. I've just taken a couple of screenshots of our interactions with the Independent Press Standards Organisation in November 2015, where they rejected our complaint about that terror article. If you check, so we'll put that up on Twitter if anyone wants to see our interaction. Again, that is based on the Daily Mail publishing an article which said there was terror camps in the UK, Khalistani terror camps, that are based on a dossier that was allegedly handed by Modi to David Cameron. The Sikh Council found that that dossier didn't exist, confirmed by Parliament themselves. When we complained about the article based on that, it was rejected by the Independent Press Standards Organisation. So we can tweet you an example of those pictures when we interacted with them and they still rejected that complaint. Sorry, Vijay, comment.
So my question is primarily towards the two individuals who work with the media itself, because they themselves have both dropped terminologies which such as, for example, Dr. Gurnam Singh used the term liberal, right? So that in itself showcases a problematic view, because then this term showcases the fact that you yourself are liberal, whereas what is the other then? Is the other something that contradicts this idea of liberal? Whereas the term liberal in itself does not exist within the context of the Khalistani movement, because this, as Shamsher Singh mentioned, this sphere of religion and politics within the Sikh sphere exist as one. They do not exist as one and the other. The other thing is, so taking that into account, we're all aware of the fact that the Indian media, for example, it's not a monolithic thing, but it does create state sensationalism. And not just Indian media, any media itself creates sensationalism. So then how can any individual, but actually my other point is the fact that this is actually primarily based off of English medium, right? So this event is based off of the fact that English medium and its relationship with the Khalistani movement. Because the Khalistani movement does exist, as it has existed since the onset of this movement in the 60s, 70s, 40s, so on and so forth before, within the Gurmukhi and the Punjabi medium of newspaper, books, conversations, whatever it may be. So the fact is that it's not a new experience. It's the fact that it hasn't been utilized by the Western individuals and by the Western newspaper or medium individuals who work with the media, right? And that's their feeling, because then they themselves have not really exposed themselves to the true narrative of the Khalistani movement. So my main thing is the fact that how can one expect a balanced story from the news itself if the newspaper is a medium of the state, whether that be printed media, radio, whatever it may be. And then it goes on into the sense of how do you center, or how do you counteract your personal bias against the Khalistan narrative? As Dr. Gurnam Singh, you said the term, sorry.
When I used the liberal, I wasn't saying that I necessarily have that perspective. I was talking about the people who report and write about that, the media professionals.
No, but I've actually heard you use this terminology yourself in the past.
Let me answer that, because it's an important question.
So going forward, so then how do you counteract your personal bias against the Khalistan narrative? Is it that the argument is strong enough in general, or is it that the argument is something that you are not capable of understanding, one? Or is it that the argument is something that you have not yet truly delved into outside of English?
There are two different questions there. One is about the way in which the media might interpret the Khalistan struggle, and let me offer you a different angle onto this. Yeah, most liberal-minded people, and I'm not saying that I'm a socialist. Okay, so I'm not liberal in that sense. Would see, say, theocratic states as problematic. Yeah.
But then that term itself, for example, like I am Khalistani, but I'm still considered
let me make the point,
so that they would see movements that are trying to create religious states as problematic. Okay, that's their default position. By definition, liberal, they would be in favour of liberal democracies. And so it may well be that we've misrepresented the Khalistan struggle. It's being misrepresented as a theocratic struggle. But that's certainly one of the interpretations, and hence the comparison with Taliban or with ISIS, although they're kind of extremists, but also you could say with Iranian or even Pakistan to some extent. Now, it goes back to some of the comments that Man and others have made. So, as far as I'm concerned, the ideology of Khalis is something that we can put across and say this contradicts these kind of fears and views. But in the next question, I will make another point linked to that about divisions within the community.
Well, let's go to another comment from the audience. So we've got VG right back.
Can I just say one other thing? If you look at, say, the Israelis, a good example. I think that Israelis are a terrorist state, okay? I believe that they are committing all kinds of violence against Palestinians. But if you ever see Israeli spokespeople in the media, they are very powerful at using reason, rationality, logic, and all of those, and they often defeat the people who are trying to challenge their policies. So I'm not saying that we emulate them, but they know how to use the media. They're very skillful.
That's really interesting comment, because one of the responses we got from our questionnaire, which we sent out to media professionals prior to this event, in regards to terminology around the Khalistan movement and Sikh movements in general, it actually stated that they felt using the word genocide to describe what happened in 1984, so calling that a Sikh genocide, they said that was insensitive to the Jewish community. So just to repeat, a media professional said to the Sikh Press Association, calling what happened in 1984 a Sikh genocide is insensitive to the Jewish community. So that does kind of further your point about the way often Jewish topics are portrayed in the media.